unfortunately. And I'm glad to be here. Are you all tired of sitting in those seats?
Yes.
I know. I'm so sorry. And you've got 2 more days of it. What can I say? I can only imagine the pain and the agony. And I wish I could say, let's get up and dance around the room for a bit. We will do a little bit of experiential things during the session, but what I would have to do are to cover some things. I know a lot of this has been about, how to get into the University of South Carolina, making sure everything's smooth, what to expect, what to do. What I'm going to be talking to you about is how to get out of here and get a degree and pass your licensure exam, because we're going to be talking about some lifelong learning skills that are inherent in our graduate program. And I know some of you may already have other graduate degrees, but for many of you, this is going to be your first experience doing graduate level work. It is qualitatively quite different than undergraduate work. And I don't mean just that there's more of it. I mean, it's qualitatively a different kind of an experience. I'm not going to teach you how to do that today. I couldn't begin to do that. I am going to give you an overview of what some of the things are that you should expect. And so the focus that we have today is on how to read. I'm assuming that you all learned that, hopefully at some very young age. But we're going to be talking about how to critically read as a scholar, as someone who's interested in research evidence and the other kind of advanced professional information that can tell you whether an intervention works or not, so that you're not just doing some new fad about how to help somebody, but you're really looking at things that could make a difference and make real change. Let me see if I know what this. Do you know where I aim this to make it advance? Terry was just doing it, so I know it's. Do you know what I aim this at? Do it this way.
What we need is someone who's about 17 years old.
I don't need to have my backs to the front row. So the purposes of this session are to increase your understanding of the importance of critical reading and critical thinking as a foundation for professional social work practice, to increase your knowledge about resources that are available, particularly to support your writing skills. Now, we talk a lot about writing, but we're really talking about communication skills. You're going to be doing a lot of presentations. But social work is, by definition, a social profession. It's all about communication. It's all about interaction. And writing is one way that we express ourselves. And generally, if you're a good writer, you're good at communicating in other ways as well. Now, what is a professional? Well, you're here to become a professional, right? I mean, you're not here to study sociology. You're not looking at, neuroscience. You're entering a profession. And what does that mean? If you were entering medical school, you'd be entering a profession, law school, but you're in social work school. It involves some kind of lifelong, so that there's a sort of a career orientation. How's a profession different from a job, or professional different from someone who's a worker?
They adhere to a code of ethics within their own group.
They adhere to a code of ethics, so there's some standards of behavior expected within their own group. There's a group identity. Do you have a BSW? A lot of my BSW students always know the answers to this. What are other hallmarks? Yes.
They're licensed to be qualified to do what they do.
Yes, in many cases they are licensed. That there's some certification that's been, there's a verification that they have. They can hold themselves out to the public. Basically, a professional is someone that offers to do something for the public. And there are several characteristics of a profession, so I'll go over what that is. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. The characteristics of a profession or professional are, there is a specialized body of knowledge. And in your case, in our case, we start out with foundation like human behavior in the social environment. You learn something about research. You learn about certain foundational skills. And then you learn advanced kinds of skills. So there's skills and competencies that you have shown that you have mastered. You're called a master for a reason. And you're going to be expected at many different points along the way to show that you have mastered certain competencies. You do have this group identity. In our case, many of us affiliate like with the National Association of Social Workers, but for the most part, you cannot call yourself a social worker unless you have a license, that you have an identity as to what that means. And there are these standards of behavior and practice, the Code of Ethics being our ethical set of standards, but we also have standards for different forms of practice. And they're becoming more and more standards, for instance, for gerontological practice, for other kinds of specialized practice. Next slide. So professional knowledge, skills, and standards evolve over time, but any professional has to engage in lifelong learning. You can't just get your degree and then stop learning. You have to constantly verify that you've been up to date because things change. Practices change. And so professional learning starts now. And some of what I'm going to be going over with you are some of the core skills that are required that are part of lifelong learning. Next slide, please. So today we'll focus on reading, critical thinking, and writing. Next slide, please. And we'll start with a reading exercise. You all have received two handouts. One is a set of websites that I'm going to refer to later that hopefully will be useful to you. And the other is, and I'm sorry it's kind of dark and harder to read. I have difficulty reading those kinds of things myself, but that's the way it came out, and I kind of liked it. It's a recent article from Social Work about a topic that ought to interest you, but as you'll notice, all the topic was the very first page and one of the last pages, because I'm just using it for an example today. But what I want you to do while I take a minute to load up some websites is to read the front page of this article and ask yourself these questions, because you should be asking yourself these kinds of questions. These are critical reading questions. Ask yourself these kinds of questions every time you read something. Don't just read something because, Dr. Farber said I had to read this. Read it because you might learn something from it, and critically review it over and over. Even if you read it for Dr. Farber's class or my class or whatever, it's going to come back to you when you take the licensure exam. And that's not to say that we teach only for licensure, but it's going to come back to you perhaps in a job interview that you have, and someone asks you, what do you know about such and such a theory, because it underlies their approach of their agency, the way they do things. And for you to be able to speak with some degree of intelligence about that theory is going to be very impressive, and may make the difference between whether you get the job or someone else does. So there's a lot of real pragmatic reasons to do these things, but for the most part, we're hoping you do it just because you're intellectually curious and you want to be a really good social worker. So as you read this page, please ask yourself, what did you learn? What else do you want to know? Differentiate what is fact and what is opinion. What supports the writers their facts, and what questions you might want to bring to class about what you read. So take a minute to read that page. The questions are going to go down for a minute because I need to use the web. And then when you finish reading it, turn to the person next to you and discuss some of these questions. It'll take about 7 or 8 minutes to do this. Okay, about time. So we'll just give one example of a response to each question. What did you learn from this passage? Anybody? Yes. Okay, so we're moving towards measuring empathy, because empathy's long been a social work practice, but there's some new ways of looking at it. So you learn that they're going to try to measure it differently. After reading this, what else did you want to know? How they're going to measure it? Anything else? Yes?
What population will come out of that measurement to be a better, well, I can get a better understanding of their research.
So you want to be able to look more critically at how they actually have studied empathy and what population specifically they studied with it. So you want to know more about it. And one way to do that would be to read some of the people who are listed on the reference list, which is a very common way of writing a research paper. Yes, other comments? Yes.
I wanted to know if there are any like outliers, because they made the argument, or just going back and forth, that some people believe it was like innate and like you couldn't control it, and then other people are like it's just being in your environment. So I was wondering if there are outliers, people who did not display any empathy as how they defined it.
So it raises a lot more questions for you that you want to, in terms of what's innate, and the classical question, free will and determinism. To what extent are things determined innately, and to what extent can people exercise some choice and change as they evolve? So, did anybody want to know what was in table 1? Because I didn't copy that for you. Okay, we're going to talk in a minute about how to find that out. And how did you differentiate their facts from their opinions? Their citations, which was the way they supported what they said, in terms of that this person found this or that. It's a fact that Barker gave a definition to empathy, but that definition may have somehow been Barker's opinion, right? I mean, you might have a different definition of empathy. And there's a sort of gray blend between what's fact and opinion. Some things are clearly fact. Much is opinion, though. And a lot of opinion is held out to be fact. So being able to differentiate what's a fact from an opinion is really important. It's getting harder and harder the way public media is these days, but a professional absolutely has to know how to do that. What supports do the writers give for their facts? They've got lots of references. We're going to come back to that when we talk about APA style. So what questions might you bring to class to share with your colleagues as you're further exploring this idea of empathy? Anybody get that part? Yes.
Maybe a few research has been done, because I think the last research was 2008.
Mhm.
So maybe if like more research has been done on the subject and how it's progressed since articles.
Very good point. The last article she saw was based in 2008. This was published in 2011. So there may be some newer things that have come out. And that might be something that you could do for your own research paper too, or you could ask your colleagues in your class if they've heard of anything that's out since then. Well, we could go on and on about this, but the point is, these are the kinds of questions you want to be thinking about every time you read something. There are other questions too, and you always want to be thinking about, how can I enhance my class? You're putting a lot into your graduate education. And we do classroom-based classes for a reason, because we are social workers and the social interaction is very important. So make the most of that time. Come prepared, come and ask stimulating questions of your colleagues, or make stimulating comments. It'll make the time go by much more productively. So let's assume we do want to know more about empathy, and in particular, we want to know what's on table 1, which is this chart about, these signature ingredients of empathy. How might we do that? So, I don't know how many of you went to the University of South Carolina. So hopefully you already know how to do what I'm about to show. Sorry to duplicate it, but I'm going to try, if my computer's working properly, to show you how to find this article at the library. Now, as far as I know, this works, wait a minute. This works best if you're on the university library. You have free access, because you're paying tuition, to an enormous amount of information on the internet, access that you cannot get from your own private computer, because our link is through fees that the university libraries pay. So if you go into the university libraries, you're going to learn more about this as you go through your, you'll go through a library orientation to the Thomas Cooper Library. And then you're going to want to look for articles and journals, because you want to look up this article. and choose a database. There is social work abstracts. I personally prefer PsycInfo. Anybody familiar with PsycInfo? Psych here? Yeah. PsycInfo has a lot more breadth. It covers law, government, all kinds of things. So we're going to look for this article in PsycInfo. But if you see, you're going to see all these vast numbers of databases you can choose from, many of which are related to social work. So we go into PsycInfo. Oh dear. Do I have to log on, David? I don't know from my own. Okay. It's a lot quicker than computer lab. The problem I was having, David, is getting onto any sites that were not USC. So, okay, now we're in PsycInfo, and if we type the word social work, and empathy, whoops, sorry, thank you. And empathy, and we could also do it like author search, but this should work. See what we get. And we're going to get several things, but what we're looking for is this particular article. So we'll scroll down until hopefully we get it. And here it is. Is this it? That's by the same author about teaching empathy. There it is. And you can get the full text article. And for educational purposes, you can use it as you see fit. So as you can see, that, and there are going to be thousands of potential articles like this for you to get to. It's important to have this skill and to not use Google Scholar or internet searches blindly. I don't know where do you know where the file would go? Usually the PDF will come right out. I think this computer may not be set up. It doesn't have Adobe. Okay. Well, normally it would be right there for you. So sorry about that, because you'll just have to go for yourself and find Table 1 and see what else you can learn about the essential components of empathy. Okay. That was reading. Part of reading exercise number 1 is, first of all, read critically. Second of all, read the right sources. Read scholarly sources. And some more tips about reading critically is when you have an article to read, glance through it first, read all the headings, read the abstract, think about what it says. If it's a book, read through the chapters. Always read the preface and the introduction. The authors wrote the book for a reason and contextualize it in some way. It's very helpful. Read and think of it in terms of asking questions of the authors as you read. You then recite back, and what are the authors saying that might answer the questions I have about this? Like in the case of empathy, I might be asking, how does empathy relate to altruism? I read a lot about altruism. How is empathy different from altruism? Or, they're talking about what neuroscientists are saying about empathy. I mean, social workers have been talking about empathy forever. What does empathy have to do with the brain? That's neuroscience. So I might want to learn some more about what brain doctors are saying about it. Anyway, so I might have lots of questions in that way and see what these authors have to say. Always make notes. Keep a constant journal. It's a good professional practice, whether you're going to be macro or micro. Lessons learned, you're constantly learning day by day. And so keep making notes about what you read and then review it. Do this and you'll be sure to master the material, and over time you'll find greater ease in mastering your skills. Could you put the next slide up, please? So, we've talked about reading, yes.
I have
David, I'm glad you're here.
PIP or?
There's a product you can check on our website called VPN that will actually let you VPN and get access to all the resources you can get on campus, off campus, from anywhere. Just check out the website. If you want to send me some specific info, I'm doing a technology orientation tomorrow, and I'll give you my email address and everything. I can answer some of these questions tomorrow.
Yeah, there's definitely a way to do it, and you can get the access as long as you're registered at the University of South Carolina or if you're employed here. So what are the characteristics of a critical thinker? This is another one I want you to take a few minutes talking to someone who sits next to you in terms of what are the hallmarks of a critical thinker. We'll take 1 minute to do that, come up with as many words as you can. Okay, time's up. And what did you decide are the hallmarks of a critical thinker? They're analytical. What do you mean by analytical? They can analyze facts. Okay, what does it mean to analyze facts? Look at things from a different perspective, break things down. Right, yes.
Thinking outside the box.
Thinking outside the box is another way of looking at critical thinking, yes. So it's thinking is more than just doing the thinking, but also knowing how to apply it, yeah? Being impartial. Possibly taking some risks. Tell us more about why critical thinking might be related to risk taking. That helps. So critical thinking could involve doing things that other people might not agree with or think are weird or crazy. So I'm looking at it critically. Well, if you'll give us the next slide, I just threw up some, along with a resource that I had available. But obviously being curious, doing creative questioning, asking why questions, seeking credible information, discerning main points. Discerning the main point is a really important critical thinking skill, and one that your professors are going to push you hard on. Dealing step by step, sticking to main points once they get to it, being open-minded, considering others' views, being willing to change, seeking precision, sensitive to others, and withholding judgment until evidence is clear. Another one probably would be to think before you speak, take a little bit of time before you say things, would be signs of critical thinking. So my goal today is not to teach you critical thinking, but to raise your mindfulness of what it means to be a critical thinker. Your professors will be working on these skills with you. Next slide, please. There are some steps that you can follow in doing critical thinking. For example, if we took this article on empathy and we were reading it to acquire knowledge, to better understand what social workers might want to know about what neuroscientists are saying about empathy, which is one of their main points, you would attend to the details and discern what are the main points. We didn't read the whole article, so we don't know what they all are. We would read for understanding, to try to relate this new information to what we already know about social work practice, or about empathic responding, or about other things like generosity or care, or some of the things that may be related to empathy. We would look at considering how to apply the new knowledge in practice. So if you read that article on empathy and you think about a client, let's say you're working in a direct micro-practice setting and you've got a client who's been talking to you about the history they have thinking about suicide and the ways they thought about committing suicide, and you're thinking about how you responded to that. And it's hard to be empathic when you may feel alarmed or concerned or obligated to report, depending on what the circumstances are. And so you're thinking about, how did I show empathy for someone, who's in this really difficult spot? So you apply the knowledge, and maybe there's something in this article that would help you in some way. Next slide. You then analyze it, take it apart, but then you also synthesize it and put it all back together in a new way. Synthesis is a very important part of the critical thinking process, where you not only take things apart, but like when we're thinking about something like empathy, I can then relate it to other times that I've, say, expressed empathy in some way, or been so distracted that I didn't express empathy, maybe learned from a negative experience. And together, somehow I put it all together so that the next week when I see that same client, I have a new way of trying something. And so I synthesize what I've learned based on multiple sources of information, and then I apply it, and I evaluate it, and I think again about, so how did I do this week on my empathic expression? We, as professionals, are constantly looking at ourselves and how we do what we do. The tool we have as social workers, no matter what kind of practice we do, is our main tool is ourselves, and our main methods have to do with our social communications. So we're constantly working to improve that. And in order to do that, we have to be good critical thinkers. Yes. And when you put your thinking together with your reading, there's some sources here, and I know David left, but these are the sources. I was going to try to tap you into some of these online sources. You do have a second handout. It's got the 6 slides in it. All the slides that I brought that have web links on them are on there. So I would encourage you to look at some of these slides. The first one is at University of California, Berkeley, put together a presentation on how to know if a source is scholarly. And it addresses things like problems with Wikipedia. Now, what do you think the problem with Wikipedia is? What's one sign of a really good source? Peer review. But what's the number one sign?
Credible.
Well, it has an author. Wikipedia has no author. You don't know who wrote it.
And you can like click on a link, change it. Just like if something's wrong, just click on this link.
You can change it, yeah. And I use Wikipedia. I'm not saying, not for scholarly purposes, no. If someone's talking about some musician I haven't heard of, I'll look them up. I'm like, oh, okay. And I know, though, they may not be correct. But the number one thing you want is an author. And over time, you learn. I work in the child abuse field. If Jim Barbarino writes something, I'm going to read it. He's really good, and he's got a framework I agree with. He does incredibly diligent research, so if it's got his name on it, it's good. Now that's not to say that every name you're going to recognize every name you read, but credibility comes from peer reviews, people looking at someone else's work and saying that this is really accurate. So. But these kinds of things are covered in the Berkeley present. It's a slideshow kind of thing you can put yourself through, and it'll tell you how to choose what's a good source and how to differentiate that from what's not a good source. And believe me, I get students who submit things all the time with some link to a website that has no author, and I'm like, how can you even question somebody if you don't even know who wrote it? So. There's another one too at the St. Martin's. They also have a list of ways to assess sources. And then the USC research resources, that's a link to our own libraries. I went into PsycInfo, but there are literally hundreds, maybe thousands of different sources that you can use. So if you're doing a paper in the area of military, there'll be links that get you into literature related to the social needs of people who have a military history, or gerontology, or child protection, prevention science, all kinds of links that you might be able to find in the USC libraries. Now, we've talked about reading, we've talked a bit about critical thinking. I want to spend some time on writing and expression and speaking as a social worker. Next. What I'd like you to do now is spend some time, and this time we're going to take more like 3 or 4 minutes. I want you to share the 3 ways that you learn to become a good writer. All of you were admitted to this program after writing some kind of statement. I'm hoping that you wrote many papers in college. I know we have some colleges who don't give you a college degree and don't expect you to do that, I'm sorry, but you'll learn it here, but it'll be a little bit harder. But all of us have learned to write. And I want you to share the 3 tips that you value most about how to become a good writer.
Are you talking about
Sure.
academically or?
Or creative writing?
Yeah.
Both. Any way that you consider yourself to be a good writer, how did you learn? So share with us some of the tips you have for how to become a good writer based on what you've learned. Let's hear a few of them. Yes.
One thing I learned was actually in high school, but if you have a paper, read it from bottom up until you read the sentence by sentence other way, and that'll help you cut down the sentence fragments because you can look at the sentence, not reading it ahead of it.
Okay, this is the paper you just drafted? Or, yeah. So if you're drafted a paper, before you turn it in, read it backwards from the bottom up, because that will help you see if it really makes sense, and it will particularly help you detect sentence fragments and things that may be grammatically incorrect. Yes?
Read a lot and use a thesaurus.
Read a lot and use a thesaurus. And if I may, I would say read excellent writers a lot. I've actually never read a book by Stephen King, and horror is not my genre, but he had a great book called On Writing or something like that, and I did read it. I read books about writing, and basically it's his autobiography, and the man, as you know, has probably written 75 books. Well, he says he reads a book a week, and I thought, well, or a book and a half a week, and I'm like, that's like 80-something books a year, and he writes 1 or 2 books a year. How on earth does he get all that done? But he does. So anyway, he's a great writer. Yes, someone else?
When I have a subject to write about, I normally just write it on paper. It can make absolutely no sense, but my brain is on fire, so I'm clicking on paper, my brain is on it. And then I start to review and make some sense of it. However, what you brought up,
All right, let me summarize your first point first. Brainstorm. Just get your ideas down on paper. Don't worry about the technicalities. Yeah, and then what you were going to say?
I've never heard of reading my sentences backwards. I've never heard that before.
Okay, so she's affirming the read backwards. That sounds like a fun thing.
We both thought having somebody else read your work for you.
Absolutely.
Read your work, not be directed, so don't pick up the things that you were just filling in on your own.
Yeah. Peer review is absolutely entirely important. Those of us who work professionally and are writers, I've written 5 books and I don't know how many articles, probably 50, that got published. And yeah, without peers reading my stuff, I mean, it would mean nothing. So, and some of the people who love you the most will be your harshest critics. Just get ready. Outline, yeah. I know that your 3rd grade teacher taught you how to outline, and you hated it then, and you probably hate it now. It makes all the difference, and it saves a whole lot of time. It will really tell you whether you're making sense or not from the get-go. Other tips? Yes.
I have something to do about like what we learned in elementary school too, the 5-paragraph essay.
Yeah.
And now it's more than 5 paragraphs. 5 parts.
5-part essay, absolutely. And some people say it's a 3-part, say what you're going to say it, then say what you said. But I definitely have these introductions and transitions and closings. They really help the whole thing make sense. Without being redundant, without repeating yourself. There is some creativity to it. That's why creative writing and professional writing go hand in hand. Yes?
For me, it's really important to write about something I'm passionate and care about. And I feel like I write way better if I care about the research I'm doing.
That's true. Make sure you've got a passionate topic. And even if you're asked to write about something that sounds totally boring or, is some essential thing that you absolutely have to know, you can figure a way to make it interesting. I mean, tie it in somehow with something that you really care about. It really does. Yeah, we definitely do our best writing when our heart is in it as well as our minds. Yes.
I would say, think about the audience. A lot of times you read the paper, if it doesn't make sense, the person who wrote it is not going to be evaluated.
Absolutely. So she's saying, think about your audience. If it doesn't make sense to the person who wrote it, it's not going to make sense to anybody else. And sometimes reading it out loud helps you to know whether, someone's going to get it or not. So, yes.
When I started, I read it at the top, say what you mean what you said, and say it well.
Say what you mean what you say, and say it well.
This is simple and right. If you don't, just read the other language in your regular life and don't try to put it.
Yeah, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Why use a long word when a short one will do? Why say utilize when use is a perfectly good English word? It's not impressing anybody. And that is a good segue to the next thing I wanted to tell you about. I'm not going to begin to tell you all the resources that are out there. Next slide, please. Oh, but at least I did have some slides on tips. This one tip I kind of liked, which is write more, write even more than that. When you don't want, write when you don't want to, write when you do want to, write when you have something to say, write when you don't have something to say. Write every day and keep writing. So, next slide, please. These are just three of my favorite. Read excellent writers, know your professional resources, which I'm about to talk about, and remember, asking for help is a sign of strength, and I'm going to talk about that too. If you're here to learn how to help people and you don't know how to ask for help yourself, well, we have a problem. Being able to recognize when you need help and being a gracious receiver of help is really a foundation for having the audacity to believe that you can actually help somebody else. So we're here to help you, but we can't help you if you don't ask, or if you don't give some clue that you need help. We're pretty good at detecting things, but we're not that good, and there are a lot of you. So please keep that in mind. Next slide, please. Okay, Dr. Brown mentioned this. I have my copy with me. This is required on almost all your syllabi. And we could talk a long time about why social workers require a psychological style manual, but most social scientists do. And this is, sometimes people think this is the book that teaches you how to do a reference citation, but it's way more than that. It's got tips on how to write simply, how to write concisely. It's got grammar guides. It's got a very important resource on how to use unbiased language. And so we're going to talk in a minute about referencing. That is a part of it. But this is a really useful tool to have at hand. Next slide, please. You can also use another kind, in addition to the APA, it's helpful to have whatever they taught you in English grammar or composition. Strunk and Wright, this book was first written in 1918 and it's still in print. It's also, I think, available online. The Elements of Style. It's just basic things on, how to compose sentences that sound smooth and clear in English. Next slide, please. There's also some excellent websites, one of which is the Purdue, it's known as the OWL, it stands for Online Writing Lab. Have any of you ever used this at Purdue University? I don't have any students who don't go there. It's got everything you need about writing. The people at Purdue have been most useful in producing this for us. And if you don't use any other websites, I'll give you a day, you probably ought to use that one. And write things and then double check what you're writing. Or practice, every few days, go to the Purdue OWL, learn something, and then double check your writing and see if you're adhering to the kind of principle that they suggest about the grammatical suggestions. The NESW Press also has suggestions for authors. This is in case you want to publish with NESW. But the suggestions that they have are very helpful for student writers as well. And there's one that's absolutely essential because this will affect your grade. It's the Guidelines for Writing About People, and I'm going to take you there for a minute. Under Tools for Authors, Guidelines for Writing About People, you know, when I was, a million years ago, when I was learning to be a social worker, the first group I worked with were people who have what is now known as intellectual disability or retardation. And that was not at all unusual for someone to say, that person's a retard. Now, today, that's like almost shocking to say. It's such a cruel thing to say. It's like, and what's wrong with saying that? It's labeling. It has developed a demeaning context, although retardation is something no one can help happen. What else does it do to the person?
It reduces the person just there to this one characteristic of themselves.
It reduces them to one thing. I mean, there's one thing you learn as a social worker, it's going to be how unbelievably rich we are as human beings, how many different identities we have, how many different capacities, capabilities. You know, that every single human being cannot be minimized down to he's a criminal or he's a juvenile delinquent or whatever, or a drunk, or, you know, these derogatory kinds of things. NASW has guidelines for writing about people that is really important for you to know. Because if you use some of these terms in papers you submit in your class, you may get marked down the first time. If you use them in the second year in my class, you will fail. That is an unacceptable professional, not the whole program, but that is unacceptable professional behavior. It's just, you don't use things that are derogatory. So if you don't learn anything else, learn this. But it's the guidelines, and the link is on your thing. It's guidelines about writing about people. It talks about things like seek and use the preferences of people about whom you're writing. You know, are going to say black or African American? Well, in different situations, it depends. You know, not all people of dark color in the United States are African American. Some of them are African Africans. So it's, you know, or some are white Africans. So there's lots of choices to make depending on who you're writing about and what the preferences are. Be as specific as possible. Use positive terms. Remember that you're writing about people. We talked about using people first language. Avoid using terms that label people like just the poor or the elderly. Be careful about when you say boy or girl as opposed to young woman or young man. When it comes to an age when people don't want to be called boy or girl. Anyway, you can see in this handout there are just great examples. Well, it depends on the group that you're at, but you can look at the details, but it's going to vary from one group to another, and you will work on this in your classes too. It depends. Some people are okay with that term. So, go back to my slideshow. Just again, I'm not here to teach you this right now, I'm just here to show you some of the resources that you have. So, get back to and then we can finish up here. So NSW, there are also, the University of North Carolina had their School of Social Work, has some excellent resources on writing for social work. I encourage you to go there. It includes one that's called Tips for Writing a Great Paper. And then finally, as I said before, asking for help is a sign of strength. And here at the university, we do have the Centers for Academic Excellence. Our goal is for you to succeed. You've been accepted. We formed a partnership with you. We're going to work hard for you. We know you're going to work hard to develop yourself as a professional. And so these resources exist for you. Now, I will say this. We have a writing center. Last year, the hours were terrible. They were like 10 to 4 on some days or something like that. I haven't seen the hours yet for this year. I know the faculty complained. So you may have to work your schedule in a way that you can get over there. But if your professor says, I suggest you go to the Writing Center, it's a good idea that you go and go soon. Even if your professor doesn't suggest it, it's a good idea to go. Yes? For the Writing Center. Naomi, do you know if people who are at distant campuses have access to anything like the Writing Center? I would get online and ask them that, because and it could be that there are similar programs at at regional campuses or someplace near the campus you're at that might be able to be helpful. And I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. Well, that ends my presentation. Are there any questions or comments that you'd like to make? I wish you well. I look forward to reading some of your work. Yes. Excuse me. This is unrelated to the workshop, but some of you are registered for my Social Work 732 Communities and Organizations class, and we're told the textbooks aren't there, and we checked it out, and the textbooks are there, although there was a problem with section numbers. So just come here in that class and get it. The books are all there, and they're not for everybody. You might need to just use a different section number, but there are two books, Chris Altman, Foundations of Communities and Organizations or something like that, and another book on proposal writing. Yeah. Okay. She's saying the same thing's happened with the 712 textbook, that it's there, it's just not there under your section number or under the J. So just keep pushing, because apparently the books are there. Other questions? Yes. Third book for 732? Do you remember?
Every section, every required course has a minimum number of texts. Some may have more, and it's up to the instructor if there are some additional resources. So it may be that there are some additional.
Some of the courses have required books and supplemental books that are optional, so you might need to see the syllabus.
My advanced practice courses have the good fortune communication. So, anything else before? Yes. For field, yes. Okay, guys, friendly patient. We'll see you tomorrow, but